Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com.
You know, I tried all that and I hit that point, that Fight Club point where I had nothing. I had no job. My house had been repossessed. My relationship had broken down. My best friend's partner had just died. My dog was dead. Everything just went smash. And that's only when, like you say, and like it says in Fight Club, that's only when I realised, well, hang on a minute. Now I can just live in my camper van and go anywhere and do anything and be anything I want.
Today I'm joined by the author of The Happy Nomad, Charlotte Bradman. Charlotte is an incredibly talented writer, an all-round creative human. We all need to live that inner artist, and for Charlotte, it took some serious financial, emotional and personal turmoil to get there. We're going to be talking about her life, her traumas, how it led to great creativity, what she had to go through for that and what she's learned, because we're all living in a time of crisis, a cost of living crisis, a mental health crisis. The poly crisis is real, and Charlotte's words bring great wisdom. This is The Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? My name is Ben Talon. I am the host of the Creative Condition podcast, the founder of the Creative Condition, creativity coach, illustrator, writer, all that good stuff, living as an inner artist on a good day. How are you doing? Are you well? I've turned a corner. I've turned a fucking corner. For long-term listeners, you'll know I've been going through a bumpy period. And when I've sit down to really reflect on that, it's been 3 years, probably about 3 years, maybe longer. I've always had an overthinking brain. I've always had a very sensitive disposition. That is who I am. I'm an emotional sponge. I'm an empath. That is what sends me down rabbit holes. Usually, it puts me on a lot more peaks than it does troughs. So I feel the good stuff intensely. And that's what attunes me with my creativity. Usually the bad days were few and far between, when I would be overthinking, when I would be feeling the pain of others, etc., etc. But just recently, the last 3 years, I've been suffering a lot of anxiety because I haven't managed my thoughts as well as I could as an exhausted new parent, as someone with new financial pressure, someone learning far too much about the climate crisis, someone susceptible to the evils of the world. So I've turned a corner because I've been doing much more meditation. I've been doing deep work on myself, journaling to get to the core of what's going on in this whizzy old brain of mine. Those of you who remember the episode with Alison Heiligser, we talked about whizzy brains, we talked about neurodivergence and about the damage that can do. I've certainly felt that in the last few years. I'm not going to waffle on about that today. But I will do something separate because I have learned many, many tools to help myself out of the hole. And I'm saying this off the back of a week where I had 2 nights where I didn't sleep a wink because I got myself into such an anxious panic that I just couldn't switch off my brain. So I have a lot of work to do. But the work I'm doing is helping to remind me what's important, how to manage those thoughts, and I'm making progress like I've never made before. So got to look at the positives. Despite the bad nights, despite the anxious spells, I've turned some major corners. So I'm going to factor that into the episodes I'm making around mental health. And today's episode is one of those. Going to get into Charlotte Bradman in a moment, but first a thank you to the sponsor, founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X, wonderful illustration, animation and art agency based in London but all over the world. illustrationx.com if you want to go and engorge on their vast array of illustration animation portfolios, world class right across the globe, catering for all those needs. bollocks to AI slop. Big ups to agencies like these who are fighting the good fight. Go and check them out now, illustrationx.com. Quick shout out for the Ukrainian Institute, who I want you to go and check out at ui.org.ua. And I'd like you to do that because these guys are in utter crisis. They're at war. They're under attack. And yet they have this incredible spread of creative talent, artists, writers, makers, who are more fired up than ever before because they know the importance. We need survival is not sufficient. That is the term, isn't it? If you want to get deeper into that, I highly recommend From the Creative Condition reading list, which you can find at thecreativecondition.com. Emily St. John Mandel's. I've lost my head here. What's the name of it? Give me a sec. I will pull up the Creative Condition reading list. I've gone completely blank on the title. There's an amazing book, right, and it's about survival. It's about that we need more than survival as human beings, and it's set in an apocalypse. No zombies or anything like that, but it is about they're a travelling theatre group, basically, in the apocalypse, because they know that despite the collapse of society, we need culture. We need to dream. We need to be aspiring to something bigger than just getting by. Station 11. There we go. Emily St. John Mandel. Station 11. You'll find it at thecreativecondition.com/reading list. It's fantastic. But we need more than that, don't we? So the guys in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Institute, they're putting together a beautiful list and an expose on all the amazing art that has been made at this time, and I would like to ask you guys to support it. Please do me that favour if you don't do anything else off the back of this show today. Go and share some of their work. If you're in a position to commission them, even better. Amazing. But it's awesome. ui.org.ua. Right, enough of the waffle. Charlotte Bradman. She's brilliant. She's written an awesome book called The Happy Nomad. She's from Keighley, just like me. She's a Keighley lass. She's brilliant, she's hilarious, she's very funny on this show, but there's so much wisdom that comes out of this show. So much wisdom that comes out of that town, Keighley. And I wrote a little diary entry about that recently. Go and check it out on the website in the diary section. Two lads got on the bus in Manchester, heading up towards Oldham, not too far from where my brother lives. Electronic tag on one of their ankles, the other one recently away from his tag, I could ascertain from their conversation. And they're sat there talking about just chilling and being bored and playing Grand Theft Auto, and there was something very cartoony about it. But later in the conversation, one of them just started to look around the bus and observe. For whatever reason, he didn't have a mobile phone. And he's looking around the bus, and people are all glued to their phones. Thankfully, I wasn't in this moment. I'd had a bit of an anxious episode. It was after my 0 sleep night version 1 from last week. So I was just looking for some solace, looking for some mindfulness, staring out the window. So I was listening to this conversation. And this is what happens when you put your phone down. You glean things, you get ideas and observations that are truly yours, that are not from Pinterest, that are not from Google Images or AI. It's real life. You're out there observing it. So these lads talking about GTA, and for anyone who knows Grand Theft Auto, there's a lot, it's a crime-based video game, and this is cracking me up. The idea that these guys are on curfews with their electronic tags and they're playing Grand Theft Auto, it's like something out of a Harry Enfield skit. And then in the conversation, this other one starts observing how people are completely trapped in their mobile phones, and his mate's talking about it too, and they're looking around and they're mindful and they're in the moment, and so am I. And it was just something beautiful about it. It just goes to show that mindfulness and wisdom doesn't have to come from people in suits with big houses. And that's what Charlotte and I are talking about today, because Charlotte had utter turmoil in her life. She had her house repossessed. She had a traumatic childhood in many ways, always in survival mode. And through this trauma, she arrived at a place where she could create. She's going to tell us the story today, and it's mind-blowing, and I love it, and I've been incredibly inspired since, to the point where I've been auditing my life to make sure that I am not deviating from the lessons that I learned in Fight Club. And we mentioned that in this conversation. She had a Fight Club moment. It's only after you've lost everything that you're free to do anything. And as far as creativity goes, the things we hang around our neck with these social constraints, they completely fuck our creativity up at times, because we're anxious, we're stressed, we're paying the bills, and we're not following the instinctive path of our inner artist. I'm going to park it there because I've said enough and Charlotte needs to say the rest, but she is a tour de force. I love this conversation. Enjoy it. Get me your feedback. There's going to be a little follow-up short episode about working classes too, because we're both very much from working class stock, and we've both gone on to have creative successes. That's not a badge of honour. We also have many creative failures and periods, as we've found out since, because we've been messaging each other a lot since. We've had a lot of fallow periods, a lot of anxious periods. It's not easy being from that background. It's not easy being from any background. But there is going to be a little follow-up episode about the plight of the working classes and observations we've made on that. So there you have it. If you want to work with me direct, creative coaching opportunities are still there. I've got bookings in for January, which is amazing as a freelancer. So they're getting scarce for next year. So if you want to book on, give me a shout. I've got the flagship pit stop session, one-to-one intense deep dive where we work through all of your shit to get you realigned. Go and have a look at the website for more information, thecreativecondition.com. I do long-term programs. I can make it work for you, but it will elevate your situation creatively. That's enough waffle from me. Let's get into it. Charlotte Bradman, author of The Happy Nomad.
And I think that's what's really important, is putting everything out there, the whole of your humanity, the negative, the mistakes you've made, all of that needs to be shared so that people recognize and understand that there's no such thing as a normal life. There's no such thing as a normal person or a perfect person. We are just as we are, and the more we kind of learn to accept ourselves and love that about ourselves, the better it will be for everyone. That's just the way. Yeah, that's why I just, all of the time, even when I've been awful, when I have been the, protagonist, all of that had to go in. So people know that it's okay to make mistakes and it doesn't define you.
It's completely true. And if you can find a way that's sympathetic to your personality to share that, I just find that it has a way of bringing the right people into your existence.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite fortunate. Like, I met a good bunch of friends around 15 who were the kind of opposite to what was going on at school, which was a very kind of is that a word? Chameleonic?
Chameleonic. I don't know. I like that word.
I like it. Yeah. If not, let's invent it. But it was, they're just very hearts on sleeves, but very genuine. And it was right before I went to art college at 16, 17. And it was lovely because, I sort of stopped masking somewhat and was a bit more open to what that sense of humor was about and what that inner weirdo was, was there for. And going into a creative field, that's just always been such a great way of defining where you need to be and the people you need to try and, bring into your world.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. People who you can be completely yourself with, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, so it's safe to say you had your fair share of trauma growing up.
Yeah, no, I mean, just sort of leading with that subject of being yourself and being as authentic as possible. During my childhood, I was programmed and conditioned to be exactly the opposite. I existed, and all of my behaviors, my conversation, my communication, right down to my facial expressions, body language, everything was, carefully curated by me to prevent or, kind of try and stop my dad from getting angry and then becoming violent. And so throughout my entire childhood and even my teenage years as well, even right through into my early adulthood, because obviously the domestic violence that I experienced as a child, it then, that is what I drew to me as an adult, that kind of chaos, because that is all I knew, violence and chaos and volatility. And so my adult relationships ended up being quite violent and volatile and very traumatic. So throughout all of that, I've never really been myself. I've always been someone else, someone who, tried to make people laugh, tried to make my dad laugh, tried to, kind of diffuse his anger so that he wouldn't be violent, so that he wouldn't be angry. And even in my book, I talk about, who am I? Even sometimes now I don't know who I actually am, because I'm so scared to be myself, because I think if I am myself, maybe myself isn't good enough, or maybe I'm too, I'm dysfunctional, I push people away. And all of that is just basically because of the childhood that I had. And it's really hard to unlearn. It's really difficult to unlearn. And, it's definitely something that I've been working on with therapists throughout my life to try and figure out who am I when I'm not performing for other people, either to make them like me or to stop them from hurting me, and it's not just me that has experienced that. I think lots of people experience that. We all put on a facade or a front or a persona because we're all so scared of not being accepted, not being liked, or being alone. And that's just inherent in all humans, I think. So, I mean,
Mm.
you're really lucky in that when you were young, 15 years old, you found a crowd of people who you could truly be your authentic self with. And
Yeah,
that's a really special thing.
I completely agree, and it's you sort of have to live a bit more life and meet more people and encounter more stories to really start appreciating that, because I suppose in your sense it's, you know, at what point am I right in thinking I guess the line gets blurred in terms of, you said there about not quite knowing who you are. I suppose in those
Mm.
younger years and growing up, the line must get blurred if it's all sort of performative and you're looking to engineer an outcome, a safety behavior, let's say. I
It is a
suppose
sensitive
the line must
behavior.
get really blurred because if you spend so much time living as anything, you're going to adopt that as your daily day-to-day habits, aren't you?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And even to some extent, even now I'm 40, 42 years old, and still, the line gets blurred. Still, I will put on this facade and this persona of being an entertainer, because I've always made people laugh. That's always been the way that I initiated friendships and kept hold of people around me, is by being the funny one, being the one that everyone wants to hang out with. Oh, let's get Charlotte out, she's really funny, who knows what she's going to do, she's well unpredictable. And that was always me, like the joker, the risk taker, the entertainer. And even now I still, I still find myself falling into that default mode. But I'm quite lucky in that I have met people, especially since I moved to Cornwall, who just completely accept me as I am. And I can go and I can share space with them and hang out with them and just say, oh, I'm really tired today, or I'm sorry, I'm not really as engaging as I usually am. I'm just really tired. And
Hmm.
they're absolutely okay with that. I don't have to perform or make them laugh or give them anything. They just accept me as I am and love me as I am. But it's a really hard thing to let go of, the fact that if I don't make people laugh and if I'm not useful or of value to them in some way, they won't love me. And yeah, I mean, I do talk about that in the book, and I just talk about, yeah, that we all have a right to exist and a right to be loved,
Hmm.
even if we do nothing, even if we are just literally just simply existing. We still deserve love and yeah, acknowledgement and yeah, support, all of those things.
Absolutely. We massively undervalue, the quietness and I was recently talking to a friend who said that he's a very shy person, and I'm working on a book with him at the moment telling his story, and he was talking about how some of his favorite friendships are the ones where they can spend a lot of time in silence together. He
Mm-hmm.
enjoys that kind of the comfort in actually being able to share a room with someone and not feel the need to talk or
Yeah,
to entertain in some way. And we massively undervalue that in our culture, don't we?
yeah, we definitely do, because obviously we live in a culture of instant gratification, of emotional highs and emotional lows, and it's just, yeah, and it's definitely social media. It's just the way that we are taught to measure our worth and our value as human beings. We're taught that if you own a house, if you go out, get a mortgage, if you work full time, if you have a new car, a big car, all these things, if you wear expensive clothes from high end brands, then you are a successful human being, that you are someone of value, of worth. And this is what is drilled into us, like pretty much from birth. And, and all of it is wrong. It's
Mm.
wrong. I mean, I will just put that out there right now. In my opinion, it's wrong. Someone's worth and their value should never be determined by material things. In fact, it doesn't even need to be determined at all. Someone has the equal value to someone else, regardless of what they own or what they've achieved or apparently achieved in their lives. We are all of the same worth and the same value, and we're all of high value. You know, that's
Yeah.
the way I sort of look at it. And yeah, it's just toxic, isn't it, for us to measure our worth and value any other way? But how
Yeah.
do you get out of those conditions, of that thought pattern of what we're taught in schools? Because that's what we're
Mhm.
taught, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, the education system is there to reward. It's there to get people into sort of high academia and onto these
Mm.
supposedly prestigious careers, and pass it into that way of being. Like I was, we were a poor, but we were a poor family. We weren't destitute, but there was a lot of value on storytelling and the right things, which I attribute to being relatively preconditioned to rejecting that stuff to a degree. Don't get me wrong. At school, I wanted a pair of Rockports instead of Rockfords, which is
I
what
did,
which
yeah.
is which is what I had.
Rock
But
farts.
but we couldn't afford them, so we never had
Yeah,
them.
we
And my
all
mum was
wanted
sort of,
kickers then. I never had a pair. My mum got me a pair of kickers from Car Boot, and they were like, oh, van loafers, and I got bullied for it. I was like,
this is the thing. And you say, I love in your book that you reference Netto carrier bags as a social sort of a
oh
beacon
yeah,
of failure almost. I worked, like I said to you, I messaged you after that, and because I worked there 263 an hour, my first job. And it was kind of like, oh God, who's going to come in from school and kind of like, like I'm in a
I'll see
zoo or
you in
something through the
Netto.
glass. Yeah.
Oh
But
well, yeah. Respect to you for just embracing it and representing the Netto brand. I'm proud of you. I'm
well,
inspired.
this is the thing. And it's funny, but, I read Fight Club when I don't know what age. I think it was just after art college. I started a graphic media communications degree at Bradford and did a year before switching to study illustration. And I remember reading Fight Club, and it had quite a profound effect on me. It articulated what I'd subconsciously felt and had sort of rejected the idea of what you just explained really well. That path, that kind of path to this perceived success that we're fed. Whether it's meet the right person, buy the house, all that stuff. And
Yeah.
ironically enough, I've got two young twins now. I have a mortgage. I've got them things, but I wouldn't have done any of it. Was it not on my terms for the life I wanted to live to a degree?
Okay. Yeah.
And that book played a major part in that kind of journey, because it was like, oh God, this is, yeah, I see this all around me. Like I get it, and I see mates unhappy in shit relationships and kind of pandering to people almost. And I saw all that, and I don't know what that was. I've always been quite observant and perceptive as a kid, so that's something there was always there, and sort of made me uneasy when confronted with those things, and sort of therefore I went through this period of rejecting them for a while. I don't really know where I'm going with that, but anyway, yeah, I find it very interesting, and it somewhat drove my desire to follow my art. So I guess I
Yeah.
want to ask you, because you're the second person I've talked to this week who had a lot of trauma in childhood, and the other person I talked to I'm working with as a coaching client. And we talked about the inner child being silenced, in the sense that, people will say, in particular reference to developing creativity, spend time with your inner child. This person said to me, I didn't have the inner child in that sense, because the inner child was constantly in fight, flight, freeze. Now, I know that's something that you'll strongly relate to.
Mhm.
That said, what did any form of creativity look like in younger years for you? Were there glimpses of it? Were there things you wanted to do but didn't get the chance to, or was it just not there because of the lifestyle that you had?
Yeah, I really wanted to be an actor. That's what I wanted to do because I had just had a natural talent. for getting into character and playing a role. And my drama teacher, really encouraged me to do that. But because of the trauma that I had experienced and was currently experiencing, I just didn't have the self-esteem or the self-assuredness to pursue that. And so I didn't do it. And then I was always good. I was good at anything creative. So drama, art, writing, just all of the things that involved, imagination. I mean, everything involves imagination. Even mathematics, requires imagination, physics, imagination. But you know what I mean? Like the creative side of the subjects, at school, in the curriculum. Yeah, that's where my strengths were. But I just didn't have the confidence to pursue drama. So I didn't do that. And so I did art. I chose art as a GCSE, but because I was experienced so much volatility at home in my home life, I ended up going down a different path where I was using illegal substances to numb the trauma that I was experiencing. So I didn't actually get a GCSE in art because I was smoking cannabis in a nature reserve somewhere during my art GCSE. I just went absolutely off off the prescribed path, as it were, and I was drinking heavily from my sort of mid-teens. I was taking Class A drugs when I was 15. And all of it was, I ended up in the wrong crowds. I was deeply unhappy. I didn't know that I had PTSD. It wasn't a thing. You didn't even talk about it back then. Mental health back when I was sort of 14, 15. It wasn't even really a phrase that was used particularly frequently. It wasn't in like general public conversation, especially PTSD. That wasn't. So I had no idea. I just thought that my extreme anxiety and the intrusive thoughts that I was having, I just thought I was going mad. And I couldn't talk about it. I didn't want to speak about it because I thought they would lock me away. So instead, in order to change the way I was thinking, change my frame of mind to escape, if you like, I would take drugs and drink. And it was a really, really difficult time. Because at the same time, my mum decided she'd finally had enough of my dad and his violence and abuse, and she left him. So during all of that, we went through a massive upheaval with my mum finally finding the courage to leave my dad. But unfortunately, a really difficult time. Could have done it earlier. Anyway, she met someone else and she moved in with them in another town and kind of left me and my brother just to fend for ourselves. But obviously at this time, I was still suffering from extreme anxiety, PTSD, likely drug-induced psychosis. I'm just going to lay it out right there. I'll probably say that I had that. And I just had no support. There was nothing. There was no one. There was just me. And it was horrific. It was the darkest time of my life. And I wanted to die. I thought about ways in which to end my life frequently, because I didn't know how I could continue how I was. And then, and then eventually in my early 20s, I finally decided to go and get some counseling, some therapy. And it saved my life. Yeah, it saved my life. Because I knew that it was either that or not continue to live at all. And and it was terrifying. Like in the waiting room in Bingley, in this like unfamiliar doctor's surgery in Bingley and just waiting for the counsellor to come and get me. I honestly thought I was going to get sectioned. That's what I believed. Thankfully, she didn't section me, and she told me that everything I was thinking and feeling was completely normal, and everyone thinks and feels this way. And I was like, "Oh, right, great, thanks."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it just a weight just lifted. And then she gave me the tools on how to manage my anxiety. The only thing I've never really had, which I think I should have done, was like trauma focused therapy.
Yeah.
But I never had that. Do you know how hard it is to get therapy through the NHS? I mean, it's a 2-year waiting list for primary care.
Wow.
Um, it's impossible. And if you need like a psychiatrist or any specific kind of therapy, like therapy for for trauma, tailored for trauma victims, it's just not going to happen. You're going to be on the waiting list for a minimum of 3 years, and that's how underfunded the NHS is, and it's horrific.
That's
Yeah,
heartbreaking, isn't it? It's
yeah.
and we anyone who's felt, I guess, any form of significant anxiety knows how immediate that is, and how it's horrific. It's a it's, and it has a self, and in your situation there, when you're sort of escaping through drinking drugs, it's exacerbated that kind of, you feel trapped, don't you? And it has a certain self-fulfilling quality to it, where the physiological feelings bring on the thoughts. It's like iron filings to a magnet almost.
Oh yeah, it's all connected. Yeah, and the body holds trauma and emotion and feelings physically, and it can manifest. You could have back pain, you could have knee pain, and it's nothing to do with your physical body. It's actually trapped emotion or trauma that your body is storing. It's a clinical fact. It's not pie in the sky theory. I went to see like an NHS consultant who was a pain specialist, and he spoke a lot about um, repressed emotions in the body causing all kinds of physical issues. But I mean, the original question that you asked me, Ben, was was about my creative journey, and I've just gone completely off piste.
It was more about the creativity in those challenging circumstances. That is because
Yeah.
like this other person said to me, you don't get to there is no real inner child in the sense that we think of time to think and be reflective and be bored and to discover and imagine. When you're living in the moment, like you
Oh, you've
explained
got,
to us earlier,
yeah,
then that
yeah.
doesn't really happen, does it?
No, it doesn't. There's no space for that whatsoever because there's only space for survival.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. But the one thing I tell you what, the one of the things that saved me when I was at my very absolute very worst, when I just didn't know how I could possibly continue to exist, and that was Terry Pratchett, the
Yeah.
Terry Pratchett novels. Um, just the way he writes, it's so accessible. It's observational comedy at its very best, and it's it's just beautiful. Yeah, the character building that he does, the nuance, the comedy, the humor. I don't know if you read any Terry Pratchett.
To my shame, no, I haven't. But
Oh
it sounds
my
like
God, read
it
it to me.
sounds like I need
You'll
to.
love it. My mum used to read to us when we were younger. I think she used to read to us to calm us down, and obviously because she's a really good mum. She would read us Lord of the Rings, and we would, escape from the violence and the abuse and the fear, constant fear, Ben, constant fear. We would escape into these worlds of wizards and dragons and elves and all these wonderful things. And both me and my brother, we really used that space as an escape, that space, that storytelling creates. And it was through that really that I ended up, reading quite young, reading adult books, and that really refined and improved and developed my own language use. And then I was writing my own stories, and then that kind of ended up as being, really angsty poetry that was terrible, that I'd never show anyone ever. And then into writing song lyrics. And I was a singer in a band for when I was 16 years old, and right through to being in my, I don't know, late 20s. I sang in lots of different bands, original bands, and I was the lyricist. I always wrote the lyrics. And that was my creative escape. That was the space that I retreated to when I felt overwhelmed, or when I felt extreme emotion or an extreme emotional reaction. I always had a pen and paper, always have a pen and paper on my person wherever I go, so that I can articulate, my thoughts and feelings, and put them onto the page, release them from my body, release them from my mind, and put them out into the world in some way. And that in itself is a way of processing thoughts, feelings, emotions. Is a lot of people journal. I write terrible poetry, and then that's and then I obviously wrote the book. And where I could put everything I've ever felt, everything I've ever been through, all in one space. And, the process of writing the book, I was completely disconnected. I felt emotion, and I kind of relived some of the moments in my past that I wrote about, but I had to be completely disconnected because you get a publishing deal, there's a deadline. You have to be really structured and quite disciplined in order to meet that deadline. And there was no space for, diving deep into my previous experiences of trauma. It just had to be put on the page. And that's what I did. I was just very clinical, very disconnected. I wrote everything down. I didn't allow myself to get over emotional. But then what happened was, after the book had been released, I became really ill. And I think a lot of that is the trauma that I've never really dealt with. So basically the trauma of experiencing what I experienced as a child and adult, and then and then the trauma of writing it all down.
Mm.
And because I hadn't really allowed it, in whilst I was writing the book or connecting with it, after the book was written and published, that's when my body could finally rest, take a step back. But in that moment of space and rest and reflection, that's when my body thought, oh, hey, now's a really good time to deal with all this trauma because you're not busy anymore. And it just went, well, hey, have it all in one go. And I went, whoa.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was a bit intense. Yeah.
Well, the book's amazing. The Happy Nomad. I absolutely loved it. And we'll get to sort of how you got there, but give us a snapshot of your setup today.
Oh, in the van?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm sat in my medium wheelbase Vauxhall Movano van, which I converted myself. So all of the furniture in here is just cheap flat pack pine furniture from this Chinese website. And, it's all been modified to fit in the van. It's very beautiful. It's very turquoise. Everything is turquoise, mint green, teal, aqua, anything that remotely has connotations of the Cornish Sea. I want to be surrounded by, because that is what really elevates my mood every time. Just looking out at that, the color of it, the turquoise,
It's beautiful.
clear ocean. Yeah, it's so beautiful. Anyway, and yeah, it's very homely, it's very cozy. In this van, unlike my other vans that I've lived in, I actually have a fridge and an oven and a grill. All the
Wow.
other vans I've lived in, I've just had one hob. That's it. So this is beyond luxury. And it's just, yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I could try and give you a little tour if you want. I'm not sure how it would work on camera. But there's lots of pictures on my Instagram if people want to have a look at,
Yeah.
where I kind of the space where I live. And yeah, it just means I don't get overwhelmed by things. I've always found that when I'm living in a house, when I'm living conventionally, I have all this space to fill. I end up just randomly collecting and buying and spending money on stuff that it's got no use, got no purpose, got no meaning, and it doesn't just clutter the space you live in. For me, it clutters my mind. It like detracts from my mental clarity, and yeah, just living in a really small space, whatever that looks like for anyone, whether it's a yurt, a shed, a boat, a van, a caravan, a tiny studio, flat, just anything. If you live in a smaller space, you automatically accumulate less, you buy less, you spend less money because you've got less space to put all these things that you don't really need. And that's one of the things that I love about living in a van, because you are living more lightly in the world, which gives you a mental freedom that is really hard to describe. It means I've got more headspace to be creative, to thrive, to be authentic, to connect with other people, to make new friends, to network. I have more space for all of that because, my mind isn't full of physical clutter. I'm not surrounded by all these things.
Yeah, it's very powerful. It's no coincidence when I was finding the roots of my artistic style. I was living in Preston and I was in an end terrace sharing with two other lads, and my rent was 150 quid a month at the time.
But
And
yeah,
I had,
that's all right, isn't it?
well, it was awesome. And, the place was freezing. It was, it wasn't particularly well kept. The landlord was a little bit, so he was a nice guy, but he was a bit sketchy and all of that stuff. But it gave me, and then for a further 40 quid, a month, I was able to hire a place in an old cotton mill in Preston as a studio. So, for 190 quid, I had a roof over my head and I had the
Wow.
freedom to go and spend long hours in this. And again, freezing, this is a theme, freezing cold
Yeah. Well,
mill
you are up
building.
north, Ben. You're up north,
Yeah.
love. Okay. You want to get yourself to Cornwall.
Yeah. But to your point, the lack of things and other things that might otherwise occupy my mind, I
Yeah.
was just so invested. I would wake up at, sometimes at 6:30 and get in the studio by 7 because I wanted to be there, because I had the thrill of being on the first steps of this thing that I'd wanted to do and just fulfilled me. And I could tell stories and I could, all of the things starting out in an arts career. It was incredible. So it's just liberating. It's utterly liberating, and that's what I wanted to sort of really sort of drill into today, because I think that it's plain to see the cost of living crisis out there. It's
Yeah.
the wealth divide is more than ever before.
Yeah.
I just feel the crackle in the social psychology, the connected psychology that is out there. When you walk the streets, people are walking around frightened. People are, in my industry, they're terrified of AI and what that's going to do to our jobs. It's going to have a profound impact. It already is doing.
Yeah.
So whenever I work with any coaching clients, I always cover a relationship with money, because you know, I mean, you can tell me a lot better than I could ramble on about here. So maybe if you could just let us in on the sort of how you were feeling at the time when, when I guess when you lost your house and when you were, when you were in that position, trapped by money, what did that look like and what did it feel like?
Well, it was awful. I was in a really difficult place. I didn't have the money to save my house, to prevent it being repossessed. In order to keep the house in the first place, because the chap that I bought it with, he left me with a huge mortgage, and I couldn't afford that property on my own. So my only option was to rent out the rooms, which was really successful. I rented all the rooms in the house out. I ended up winching a caravan into the back garden, and that became my bedroom. So I rented my own bedroom out, and you know, it did pay the bills. It enabled me to stay in that house. But what it did do was it put me in danger, because some of the people that rented rooms were not safe. You know, they were not safe to live with, to share space with, you know. And when you meet someone, when you're interviewing them to rent a room, you know, they're always on their best behavior. Sometimes it's really hard to make a judgment. And so it ended up I had some very difficult people there that were, yeah, that were I would consider to be dangerous. Anyway, when it sort of happened, when I ended up having the house repossessed, of course, you know, I felt like the biggest failure, um, you know, on the planet, because I hadn't fulfilled my role of being this perfect person within Western society, of, you know, maintaining my own household and paying for a mortgage. And, you know, I hadn't been able to live up to those standards. I hadn't been able to achieve that. So, you know, in essence, according to society's rules, whether spoken or unspoken, you know, I was a failure, and I felt like a failure because of that. And you know, and I was scared. I was terrified, Ben, because I didn't know where I was going to live. I also had this really big dog, you know, because my ex-partner had left me with the massive mortgage, left me with the dog that weighed the same as me. And I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? You know, finding somewhere to rent, not only with a dog, but on my own, you know, with if you're working 40 hours, a full-time job in a minimum wage role, it doesn't matter, right, what you do or who you are. It's not financially possible to run a house on a single minimum wage. It's just not possible. You know, I've done the math several times. Nobody can do it. And those that could find a house to rent that is, you know, the rent is low enough, they would be living in squalor, and they would literally be working 40 hours a week just for a roof over their heads and nothing else. Food in their mouths, a roof over their heads. And for me, that scared me more than anything, more than living on the streets. That terrified me, that my life would essentially become a space where I could never have time to be creative. I wouldn't even have time to connect with my loved ones. I'd only be able to see them for fleeting moments on weekends. You know, I didn't want to live like that. So even though I was really, you know, kind of distressed that I felt like a failure, you know, after I figured out, you know, I moved into a caravan in the Lake District, lived on a campsite illegally, but you know, etc. After the dust had settled, you know, it became quite clear that having my home repossessed was the best thing, one of the best things that could have ever happened to me, one of the most liberating, you know, occurrences in my life. That was one of the catalysts to, you know, my current lifestyle and my current way of being and way of thinking, and, you know, my different way of measuring worth and value and success. So, yeah, having the house repossessed was awful, but also awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, in the way that these kind of truly traumatic episodes can often be disguised, you know, they come in disguise, can't they? Of course, they're very nuanced and they're completely traumatic. That's not to understate the weight of the adversity, but sometimes they have a way of making you commit to something that where you just the choice is taken away. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely forces your hand, which
Mm.
sometimes can be a good thing. Yeah.
So what did that point of commitment to living in the van look like? You know, was it a slow transition? How did that come about?
Yeah, like a slow transition, really. I went from the house that got repossessed to a caravan in the Lake District with a partner. That relationship broke down. I ended up moving back in with my mum. I mean, I've always had a camper van for holidays, but I also needed a van of some kind because my dog was so big that you know, it was just better for her if I had a van. She had more space. She was an American Akita. Um, yeah. So I've always had I've always like gone on holidays, extended holidays in camper vans, but you know, up until whichever point in my life, I never thought I could live, use that space as a permanent residence, somewhere to live all the time. Um, but yeah, I think it was just gradual, really. I ended up, yeah, sort of rekindling the relationship with the guy who I was living in the Lake District with. And through lockdown, we lived in this horrible flat in Bradford. I was working for the NHS. And then a few things happened. That relationship ended again. Um, my best friend's partner died of terminal lung cancer. And that all happened at the same time. And then I don't know. I was just burnt out. I'd had enough. I couldn't continue as I was. I'd worked the NHS all through the pandemic. That was really stressful and quite difficult at times. And yeah, I just needed to get away. So I just packed everything. I got rid of everything. I packed up what I needed, put it in the van, and then I just literally drove off into the sunset, Ben. That was it. I was just done. I just didn't want to engage with life anymore. Lots of awful things had happened. My friend had lost her partner, and yeah, I was burnt out. I was emotionally drained, and I needed some space. And the van was the space that I needed because it was a home that I could move, I could take with me wherever I went. If I was scared, I felt unsafe. It's just a case of the key in the ignition, move the whole house to somewhere else where I feel safe. I had control of this environment from, my childhood and my adulthood, where I didn't feel in control of any of my environments because they were just full of fear, or they were owned by a landlord or owned by a mortgage, a bank, and they could be taken away, whenever. That safety could be taken away whenever they so chose. And I was tired of putting my, safe space, the responsibility of my safe space, into the hands of other people, or the ownership of my safe space into the hands of other people. I just wanted something that was all mine, that nobody could take away, and that was a camper van. And and that's where I am right now. And
Mm-hmm.
no one can take this away because I tax it and I insure it.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's, yeah, it is. There's no fear in this space because it's just me in this space. I'm very kind of careful who I let into this space.
Mhm.
And yeah, and so that's one of the reasons why I ended up in the van, I think, because it was a sanctuary.
There's some wonderful stories about connection and community in your book. I'd love it if you could recount the story about Phil.
Oh, Phil the Wizard.
Yeah,
Oh
I love
yeah.
that. It's one of my. I love that story. I ended up reading it out loud to my wife. It's yeah, it's awesome.
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah. So the first camper van I ever bought was this ridiculously big Bedford, and it was a case of like Goldilocks, really. Where first she goes for the bed that's too big. Anyway, that's exactly what I did. I saw this camper van. I thought, oh my God, that is like that is a house on wheels. I need that. That is what I need. And it was a big Bedford coach built camper van, had the bed above the cab. It had like a separate bathroom, separate dining area. It was amazing. And I went down to Coventry to buy it. My mum, she drove me down. And so as I'm buzzing, I'm driving back, I'm scared. So I'm following my mum on the motorway. I've never driven anything bigger than what had I been driving before? I don't know, a Fiat Punto, you know. And so I'm in this massive truck, camper van motorhome thing. And I'm following my mum very carefully up the motorway back home from Coventry. And it starts juddering. And I'm like, what's going on here? I was just cruising, windows down, radio on. I was the queen of, my domain. And then it starts juddering. And then smoke starts billowing out over the front of the bonnet. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't even see where I'm going. The brakes have stopped working. So I had to guide it into the hard shoulder, um, which was just happened to be on a motorway bridge. I mean, if someone had been filming this, it'd have been like something out of Mission Impossible. It was ridiculous. How I survived, I do not know. But I managed to guide this massive motorhome without working brakes. The steering had stopped working somehow onto the hard shoulder of this motorway bridge with a sheer drop of like 100 foot. Anyway, it turns out it was something really simple. So the guy who'd sold it to me hadn't checked the water before we set off. I was as 21 years old. I didn't think to check that. Was I 21? Might have been 23, 24. I didn't check the water either. And it was just a case of the whole thing had just blown up. The head gasket, the whole engine had melted into one lump of shit. Um, Anyway, I was distraught. The guy, he wouldn't let us take the camper van back because it was like sold as seen. So we had it recovered to outside my house back in Keighley. And then I'd already joined this Bedford, like forum, this Bedford members club where everyone who's obsessed with Bedford vehicles was in this gorgeous online community. I'd already joined it and I'd already mentioned, hi guys, my name's Charlotte. I'm off to pick up my very first Bedford. And they were all really excited. And then when I got back with my melted engine Bedford on the drive, I posted in the group, oh my God, guys, it's all gone wrong. It's blown up. My life is over. The Bedford is dead. And there was this guy. Well, everyone chipped in and went, oh, don't worry, Charlotte. You just need to speak to Phil. And I'm like, who's Phil? Oh, yeah, he'll be on here. He'll message you. It's Phil the Wizard. He'll get back to you. He'll sort it out. But I'm like, all right, let's. And then he did. He messaged me, this Phil, through the forum, and he's like, so down to earth, this old boy, sort of 60s, mid 60s, ponytail, all kind of wizened, and he did look like this I don't know, like a samurai warrior. If a samurai warrior came from Lancashire with a ponytail, that's kind of what he looked like, a cross between a samurai warrior and a wizard. Anyway, he drove all the way over from miles away somewhere in Lancashire and had a look at the engine. And he went, yeah, I can rebuild that for you. You just need to give me, whatever you've got, and I'll come over every week, and we'll just work on the side of the road, and we'll do it. And it took 6 months, and he came over every single week, and whatever spare money I had, I gave him. And he was out there in the wind, in the snow, in the ice, and I was helping him cleaning parts in buckets of methylated spirits, and he rebuilt the entire engine from scratch. It was a brand new engine. This amazing engineer, this man, this angel, this wizard, and he did it all, and he just did it for what I could afford to pay him, and he did it out of love and community, and yeah, it was just amazing. And that was Phil the Wizard.
It's incredible, and that level of authenticity, it kind of goes against what you explained earlier with the kind of prescribed path to this idea of success in life, doesn't it? And it's real bonds and real connections like that. And you talk about also Car Park Warren, which is another awesome story, and going on the coastal path walk, and it's beautiful and it makes you feel good inside. And I think sometimes in life we forget that it can be as simple as having the time to move towards the things that make us feel like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Or as simple as having the capacity to be open to those moments and those connections. If you're stressed out to shit because you're trying to make ends meet, you're struggling to pay the bills, you're struggling to put food on the table for your family, you are not going to have the mental capacity, you're not going to be in the right headspace to even allow and enable for those kinds of connections, those kinds of, beautiful moments that happen when two individuals are open and trusting and compassionate. Because when you are at the height of your stress, because all you do is struggle, all you do is survive, not thrive. You're not going to have those moments, Ben. That's the thing. That's why I chose the life that I live, because I wanted more moments like with Phil the Wizard, like with Car Park Warren, because in both of those instances, I was in the right headspace to receive and to be open to connection. But if you're not, if you're stressed, which most of us are, because of the total inequality of with wealth, if you're stressed, you're just not going to have capacity for that, which is absolutely tragic, because that is what life is all about. It's about community, it's about connection, it's about supporting each other, it's about loving and accepting each other. But how could you possibly do that if all you can think about is whether you're going to be able to pay the bills next week? Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, and it's a wonderful thread in your story. Is that dropping all of that stuff, the materialism and the pressures, and the kind of transformation that happened. There's a lovely line in there. Let me see. I've got it here. Where you talk about moving from being, I think it's your line. I don't think it's a note that I made. Where you talk about from moving from being a collector to being an observer and an
Yeah.
experiencer.
Yep.
That was so well put. As beautiful, and it's so true. So, what did that look like in the early days of being sort of full time in your van? Did you give yourself to that readily? Was that something you had to learn given the trauma you'd previously suffered, or were you, I'm thinking in terms of mindfulness and being present, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. A lot, initially it was a forced position, a forced way that I sort of framed um, the way I perceived things, material things, and object. It was forced because when I had the house repossessed, I had no choice but to let go of all these things I'd collected over the years, all of the art, the paintings, the sculpture, the pottery, the ceramics, everything that I thought was beautiful, that I perceived as enhancing my life in some way by owning it. I had done that. I'd surrounded myself with it. And then all of a sudden, I was having the house repossessed and I could no longer keep any of these things. And, at first I was like, well, hang on a minute. I've worked so hard to own all these things. Um, you know, but then you reflect on that. I had the time and the space then, because I didn't have a mortgage to bloody pay, to reflect on what all these objects truly meant to me. How did they contribute to my life? Like ownership of these objects, how did it enhance my life in any way? And that's when it became quite clear to me that, you know, ownership of anything doesn't enhance your life in any way. It just ties you. It ties you to a specific moment in time. If you've got a memory associated with that object, it ties you to a place. If you live in a house surrounded by objects, they're all anchors. They're all anchors that keep you tied either in the past or tied within your memories or tied in a physical place. And in order to be truly creative and to truly thrive, for me, I wanted to let go of all of that, to leave myself anchorless. That's what I wanted. And, the amount of art galleries and museums and spaces and exhibitions that are in every single community, every village, every town, even tiny villages have pop up art exhibitions and craft fairs where you can go and see and observe and be inspired by all these wonderful things and art and creations that another human being has made. that someone has brought forth from their imagination, from their body, from their mind, from their emotions, and there it is manifesting this physical thing, and you can see all of that, be moved by it, be emotionally moved by it, whether it's a piece of art or a beautiful ceramic. But you don't have to own any of it, and you can still have that same response. But the beauty of it is it doesn't anchor you. You've observed it, you've experienced that emotional reaction, you've been inspired, and you've got that. It's there in your body, in your mind, in your heart. You don't need to own it. You don't need to weigh yourself down and anchor yourself down with it. You're then free to react to it, to be inspired by it, to create your own art as a result of being moved by someone else's art. It's just, yeah, ownership. You just don't need it.
And is that something you have in your life now? Whether it's an experience of, let's say, wild swimming, or an experience with nature, or a connection with a person, have you now got the luxury of time to respond to that in your own way, whether that's just enjoying it or creating in your own sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's what my lifestyle has allowed for, is time. And that's something that you cannot buy. Doesn't matter how wealthy you are or how successful society perceives you to be. Time is something you can't purchase. And that's what I have. I don't have to work as much, because my outgoings are less, my financial commitments are less, so much lower than if I was living in a house or renting a property. And yeah, now I swim in the sea every single day. I am enriched by nature. I go to art exhibitions. I have time to go to craft fairs and just be absolutely wowed by how creative human beings are. I mean, they're amazing. We're amazing. Some of the things they think of and manufacture and engineer and dream up and create, and it's just like, wow. Your art, Ben, your art for me is just beautiful. I really connect with the fluidity of your like painterly illustrative style, and that is just it. I love it. I'm sitting on a quilt cover, right? A vintage 80s sleeping bag right now, and just the style of it reminds me of your art, because it's all about mark making in a really loose and energetic way. And I don't know, do you ever think your artwork is quite synonymous with maybe 80s style? I do, but maybe that's just me. That's how I see your art.
Maybe. I know. Thank you very much. That's very kind words. But I don't know. I never really made that parallel. Maybe.
You should. You should. I'm going to send you some. I'm going to send you some examples on how.
Yeah.
Yes, on how your art is definitely. I don't know. I think it may be subconsciously, maybe framed by nostalgia. I'm not sure. Maybe it's something interesting to have a look at. But yeah, so I still surround myself with art, but in different ways, like in this beautiful vintage 80s sleeping bag. The colours that I have in the van, I still have art, ownership of art, if you like. It's in practical forms, art in practical forms. And that's why, yeah, I am kind of obsessed with clothing prints and clothing styles and colours, because that's one way that I can express myself and my art, is through what I wear. And I do obviously have space for clothes in the van, because I would be in trouble if I didn't, Ben. Although I am in Cornwall, so I do spend most of my life in a bikini anyway.
Yeah.
Great.
What was the catalyst for you making a decision to tell your story?
It was all completely accidental, really. So I've been living in the van now for about 6 years. But when I initially moved into the van full time and was parking in the same area in Cornwall, generally kind of around Newquay, people would beep their horns very late at night or very early in the morning when they drove past my van. And I found that really, really distressing. It was triggering because if you imagine you're half asleep lying in bed and you're feeling all tucked up, all cozy, safe, and secure in your home, if you like, whatever that home may be. My home just happened to be a camp, just happens to be a camper van. And then you get someone driving past, just beeping their horn as loud as they can, and it shocks you into full wakefulness. You're on edge, you're anxious, you're distressed. It takes you back took me back to the trauma I experienced when I'd be half asleep as a child, and I would immediately wake up because I would hear my dad come in, from the pub late at night. And you'd hear raised voices. You're in wakefulness, you're alert, you're hyper aware because you're in survival mode. And that's where it takes your body. And so when people were beeping at me going past in the van, back in survival mode, back in that trauma cycle, if you like, because the van, it became unsafe. It was no longer a safe space. It was unsafe because people were vocalizing the fact that they didn't want me here, or in this county, by beeping their horn. So as a response to that, I wrote an open letter, because I wanted these people to know that I'm just a human being. I'm exactly the same as them. I tried really hard to live as society expected me and wanted me to live, which was to get a mortgage, to get a full-time job. I tried really hard to fit myself into that particular jigsaw piece, and it did not work for me. And I just wanted them to know all of this. I wanted them to see my humanity and to respond and engage with my humanity so that they would ultimately be able to feel compassion, be able to find some understanding and awareness and stop beeping me at 12 o'clock at night. And this open letter was published in a local newspaper called the Newquay Voice, which was wonderful. It's the first thing I ever had published. And it just got a really big reaction. And then a friend of a friend of a friend knows someone who has a small job at the Guardian, and through them I got some email contacts. And because I'd had such a good response in the Newquay Voice, I sent the same article over to the Guardian, and they loved it. And they published it. And the day it was published, I had literary agents contacting me on social media, asking if they could speak to me directly over the phone on the same day the article was published. And that's how I ended up with the book deal, really, because I spoke to a literary agent called Simon Trewin. He's huge. He's amazing. You would love him, Ben. He is so creative. I don't know how he fits everything he fits into his life. I just don't. Not only is he an agent to like Booker Prize winning authors. I don't know if you remember the Little Book of Calm. Do you remember the Little Book of Calm?
I do remember that. Yeah, I worked at Waterstones. I remember it always been really popular.
Yeah, he was the agent. He was the guy that made that happen when the author of the Little Book of Calm came up with this idea and was like, this, I want to help people. I feel quite anxious myself. These are the things that help me. It was my agent, Simon, who was like, this is great. Let's do it. So I already knew, and just chatting with him on the phone on that day, I just had such a connection with him. He's got his own printing press. He's obsessed with, print anything to do with print. So he's an artist. He does lots of work with charities. He has like refugees come into his print workshop, and they print really empowering and confidence building statements using his letterpress. He's just great. Yeah, so I signed with him on that day. He sent me over a contract. I didn't even read it. I just signed with him, and and he mentored me to put a proposal together for a book, and that's what I did. And then he sent the proposal off to lots of different publishers, and I was just lucky enough that one really, really loved it, really engaged with it, and they snapped it up.
It's incredible. What before I want to talk about the actual creativity and your lifestyle, but first I just want to clarify. So people objecting and beeping their horns at you, would this be you'd pulled up somewhere for the night and they were just pissed off that actually someone was living in a camper? Was it as simple as that?
Yeah, more or less, it's as simple as that. They disagree with people who live in vans because they feel like we're not contributing in the same way to society as people who live conventionally. Obviously, we don't pay council tax. Um, yeah, we don't pay water rates. We don't pay any utilities in a conventional sense. So they don't, yeah, that's what I think there's a real misconception about people who live in vans that we're all on some kind of permanent holiday. And it's like, well, we're not. I work 40 hours a week. I'm not on a permanent holiday. I don't want to simply live to work, which is what I would have to do as a single person in a minimum wage job. If I wanted to live, not just in Cornwall, in anywhere in the UK, rent a property and pay for everything on a single wage alone, minimum wage, 40 hours a week. Nowadays, it's not financially possible. I've done the maths several times, even in the cheapest place, in the most, poverty-stricken area, where the rent might be 400, 500 pounds a month. It's still not possible. It's not financially possible. And I'd already had, epic levels of stress, which made me ill, trying to make ends meet and run a household on my own, which I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it anymore. Yeah, it just wasn't for me. But a lot of people think that vanlifers or people who choose to live like I do they're not contributing to society. They're just on one long holiday and they throw their rubbish around. They throw their toilet rubbish around. And obviously it's just nonsense. You might get the odd one or two which may, litter in a lay-by, but then people that live in houses and drive cars litter in lay-by.
Of course, they're the worst for it, and it's I mean, it's not a finger pointing exercise, but I think that it's clearly a fear response, isn't it?
Oh yeah, completely.
It's something, and I think what that tends to do. So me and Laura have both been very inspired by your book. Like we're already sort of putting plans together for when the kids are of an age to sell our house to get the smallest thing we possibly can to start with and invest that money in a camper van. That we're already fired up and excited about that idea.
Oh my God, that's amazing, Ben.
Laura's about a quarter way through at the minute. I've finished the book and it's amazing. And I don't find it strange because I understand where the fear response comes from. But I think that it's the flip response to what we've had. It's a kind of, well, shit, I've got to do all this. And, and the whole point is you don't have to do all that, but you are doing that. And you obviously have some kind of resentment that is causing you to look dimly upon someone like yourself who has made a lifestyle choice, which has brought about happiness. And I think that's a real shame, but then that's what this society does, doesn't it? I suppose it creates that kind of flock mentality where then if you are an outlier, you draw scorn, and it just stirs something in people that frightens them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think as well, like you did touch on it a minute ago, but there is an element of jealousy, I think. Here this person is working really hard to pay their mortgage and, put food on the table for their family or, just to get by, and then they drive past someone who's just living apparently scot-free, life O'Reilly, no stress, in a camper van. And of course they're going to resent that. Why wouldn't they? It's almost like me resenting someone who's just won the lottery, which of course I'd be jealous. That's perfectly natural, normal human response. And I think in a way, as long as, alongside the fear of difference is an element of well, how come you get to do that and I don't? You
Hmm.
know, there is an element of jealousy there. Um, and I don't, again, you know, I don't blame them for either, really, because all human beings are scared of difference, of things we're unfamiliar with, or things we don't know. It's just a natural response, but it's having the ability to be, you know, to be objective with those thoughts and feelings when they come up in our minds and our bodies, and to recognize, oh, hang on a minute, why am I getting cross in this situation? Oh, I know why. It's because I'm a little bit scared.
Hmm.
Yeah. Or it's because I've never come across this before. So it's just having that internal awareness, really, isn't it?
It
And
is.
recognizing those feelings rather than beeping your horn. Just have a bloody think. Have a park up. Have a sit down. Have a think. Why am I beeping my horn at this person? I'd rather they just knock on the door. It's so cowardly, isn't it? Just to drive past beeping the
Oh
horn.
yeah, yeah,
I did consider getting a massive banner. You know, you can get your van sign written or, you know, vinyl
yeah.
wrapped or whatever. I did consider just getting a big, you know, sign saying, don't beep, just knock, I'll put the kettle on. You know, let's have
I
a
love
chat.
that. Love that. That'd be brilliant. Yeah.
Maybe I should do it. Maybe I should do it. Shall I do it? Maybe I will.
So, what did the process look like? I mean, how? I guess first of all, what did? But I guess I'm interested in your creativity. You know, particularly since you've been full-time van lifer, and then in regards to the context of the book, did the story flow? How did it feel when you sort of when you started to go back and tell your story?
It just all comes out. As soon as you start, you can't really stop. You know, it just keeps flowing and flowing because one memory or one experience that you're writing about will inevitably lead to another memory or experience or feeling or connection or, you know, it just flows. And of course, when I was writing, there were days when I just wasn't feeling it. I wasn't engaging with the process. I didn't want to be there, you know, and I would occasionally have a day off and procrastinate. I'd look around the charity shops. I'd go for a hike. Um, but more often than not, you know, my theory is you just have to turn up. That is all you have to do is turn up. And maybe you're not feeling the flow in that moment, but you have to force yourself into the river before you can feel the flow. And that's what I would do. You know, I would set, you know, certain sort of boundaries. I would start writing at 9 o'clock. I'd go right through, I'd have a lunch break, and then I'd finish at 4. I just, you know, basically, I treated it like a job, a proper job. Um, so I was really disciplined. You have to be disciplined. Um, but writing doesn't always just look like sat there typing away on a typewriter. You know, that's not even half of it. Writing is sometimes just sitting and staring out the window, you know, and thinking and reflecting and yeah, procrastinating. That's part of it. Because when you procrastinate, the cogs are still turning. You are still, your mind is still working. You're still accessing, you know, that creative part of yourself.
Hmm.
All of the time. It never stops. I mean, you'll know that. It never switches
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, but I researched the unconscious quite a bit when I was writing the creative condition, and it's a very real thing. You have to be conscious and intentional enough to step away and trust that even though it might feel unproductive, and we live in a society that, you know, that completely glamorizes productivity.
Yeah.
You have to step away. You know, I know it's the cliche, but the shower, the run, maybe the wild swim in your context. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
whatever the thing is that allows you to not be in your conscious brain and just to idle. That's very real. And there was something, I can't remember the numbers, but there was a high number of Nobel Prize winners when I was researching the book that their ideas came to them either in a dream, going to sleep, or upon waking. So
Yeah.
yeah, to your point, it's a really valuable part of that process. And I
Yeah.
think it takes a bit of life experience and emotional maturity to get to the place where even schedule that in your calendar to
Of
actually
course.
to value it the way it needs valuing. Because otherwise, if you're always in the conscious, you can you can produce, but you'll never get that golden insight about the way you
No.
edit or the certain stories you tell and in what order, for example.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I tell you what, there is an author and a book that I think you would really engage with and connect with. She's called Anne Lamott. Have you heard of her?
No.
The book is Bird by Bird, and it's her experience of being an author, being a writer, being a creative, and also of the her experience with the publishing industry. And she's so candid, she's so funny, and really, it was from her book when she spoke about her experience of writing and how a lot of it was just drinking tea and eating biscuits. And that was like 80% of being a writer,
Yeah.
staring out the bloody window. But it's so true. And you're right, you have to recognize that. I mean, for me, like you said, it's always when I'm just closing my eyes, about to drift off to sleep, and then my brain just goes, "Oh my God, what about this? Oh my God, this is such a good idea. What about this?" And I'm like, "Oh my, please, please stop it." And then I have to get up, I have to have a pad and pen next to the bed, and then I have to, half asleep, try and scribble it all down.
My first book, I actually scrapped 60,000 words
You
and started from
didn't?
scratch. Yeah, it was overwritten. I was trying to be funny with every sentence, all the classic traps. Because it started as a blog about basically freelance frustrations. So I started sort of writing, it's not all what it looks like on Instagram, essentially, but it was all a little bit venomous. And then I sort of started to take the sting out of it a little bit and realized that there were people also experiencing this and started to tone it down a little in the right way. And then,
Yeah.
but then it was, I remember going to my parents over Christmas, sitting down and looking at it. And I read George Orwell Down and Out in Paris and London over that Christmas and just fell in love with his prose in the sense that it was so simple, it moved and it had pace and it had punch and all the right things. And I just realized just how much I'd overdone everything. Binned the lot, sat there, and in the next 6 weeks, as you just described, it just flowed out of me. The rest, what it needed to be, just flowed,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it was such a sort of epiphany moment. It wasn't that I was copying George Orwell, but it just showed me that simplicity it was the master in that way.
And I tell you something, how very brave of you to do that. How, that the act of just literally scrapping 60,000 words shows that you have such insight into the creative process that you are brave enough to do that, to just think, actually, I'm going to start again. And the level of objectivity, that is one thing I sadly lack. Because what happens is when I have like a strong reaction to something that's happening in the world or an issue that has come up, within my conscious realms, I have an immediate emotional response. And that is the motivator to, for me to write an article or for me to write. So I'll have all this emotion inside, and when I'm writing the article, it's a little bit like the 60,000 words that you scrapped and you said were quite venomous. Well, that's kind of like me, I'm a proper Sharon keyboard warrior, and I'll get on and be like, "Oh, I'll tell you what it is, oh, fucking bastards." Ooh. And I'll write this article. And then because I don't really have that much self-restraint, I think, I'm gonna have to send this off to everyone immediately, just in case someone has the same idea and wants to write something similar. And rather than take a step back, like you did with your 60,000 words, I will just, I would just send out an absolute load of trash to every newspaper you can imagine. One of the reasons is I don't really have anyone in my life who can offer me the objective and constructive feedback I need to refine my words or to lessen my emotional response, if you like. I mean, everyone needs a creative motivator, and it's always going to come down to emotion. That is the drive behind everything, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason you You probably write, you paint, you illustrate. Um, it's emotion, isn't it? That's emotion, imagination. Um, but that can also be a negative. I've found when it's not when you don't give the emotion space to just settle down a bit before you fire it off to everyone and their mum.
But
Yeah.
then I also just really, I also think sometimes it really depends. It's horses for courses. And I think that in that, the second book was very much more molded rather than that kind of instinctive burst because I was telling, I do very different books. So I don't know. But I think great editor, the partnerships, like the biggest moments of my career that I value over the years are the relationships with good art directors who know how to rein in or get me to simplify and things like that. So I guess in
Oh,
that respect, a good editor at a good publication will know will really value the raw emotion and the power because that's what you can't teach. So I think in your instance, anyone who's worth their salt who's going to pick up that piece will know what to do with it and will know how to help you to then settle the emotions or whatever the thing that is
yeah,
that's
to
needed.
refine it. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Yeah, thank you. It's really good. Because obviously you just end up beating yourself up, don't you?
Of course
That's
you
what
do.
I do.
Mm,
Sit in the back of the van
always.
and go, Charlotte, you've done it again. You've thrown all your hormones and your emotion at someone and they've gone, no, thank you.
I'd love to ask you, in terms of advice. So I think, like I said, one of the main reasons, and many reasons I wanted to talk to you for this podcast, but one of them was because I'm doing this series of mental health oriented episodes where I'm talking to people in specific areas. And I'm well aware of everything going on out there, the cost of living crisis I've felt in myself. And I also know what an effect that can have on people's creativity or lack thereof.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd love to, you are a great example of how it can be a different way. It takes great bravery to commit to that, as anyone who reads your book will find out. And the circumstances for getting there are not linear. Have you got any sort of words of advice about, that we don't have to do things a certain way, even though society would like us to, and what that's done for your creativity?
Well, to be creative, people need the space to access that part of themselves. And if we are tied up with worry about how we're going to pay the bills, you know, I need to tidy the house, am I going to be able to afford to reinsure the car? All of these financial worries, not just financial worries, but just general life worries that we all experienced, especially people who live conventionally. I think one of the biggest things, with regards to advice I would give to everyone and anyone is stop measuring your own success and worth with material things. So stop reaching for a bigger house or a newer car or the right brand of clothes or, just things will never ever indicate how successful you are. What indicates how successful you are is how happy you are, how much time you have to access the creative part of yourself, to connect with your loved ones, to spend time with friends or out in nature or on your own, to spend time with yourself, and learn and get to know yourself. Because we don't have that time. If you're working a 40-hour week and your head is full of how the fuck am I going to pay all these bills and maintain this lifestyle and make sure that John and Sharon next door see me as being really successful, so I need to go and buy that Marks and Spencer's, twin set, whatever, so that when they see me, they think I'm rich and successful and blah. When we've got all that going on, there's no space for creativity. And it's just an illusion. It's all an illusion. It's just what society has conditioned us to behave like, to measure our worth and our value with things. So I mean, I would just recommend that people stop, you know stop buying the things and instead free up more time. Because if you stop buying all the things, essentially that will free you up. You'll have more disposable income. This is obviously it doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but if you stop buying all the things and you just have some good quality stuff that sees you through, essentially you'll have more disposable income. You may get to a point where you can work less, like you said, living in a smaller house, reducing your outgoings. And only then, really, only then can you free up more time to be creative, to access your creative self. I mean, another way to do it is just to give yourself a minimum of an hour a week, a whole hour. And even if you do nothing in that hour but sit and stare out the window, it's an hour that your mind can access that creativity and that part of you that has something to say and something to give to the world. Just giving yourself that time. If you can't reduce your outgoings, then just allocate yourself some time, be really disciplined with it. And eventually, during that hour you give yourself every week, you will find that things just unfold, and you write, you'll draw, you'll sing, you'll whatever it is, it'll just come out.
And that beautiful feeling of fulfillment, it then becomes, to your point, it then becomes about, okay, how do I find more of this time? Because I actually feel really good when I'm doing this. And then reappraising your relationship with money. It's something I encourage all my coaching clients to look at quite quickly. It's to go to the absolute extreme. I know I mentioned Fight Club earlier in this interview, but the line in there is only after you've lost everything that you're free to do anything. Always stayed with me since being a late teenager. And just on that,
such a good line.
It's awesome. And it's just on that idea of, we're only here once. Do you want the good feelings or do you want the illusion of success? It's very trapping. And I think it breaks people if they're not careful,
Well, that's what happened to me, Ben.
Yeah.
I was fully in subscribing to all of that. I wanted people to see me as being wealthy, successful, and just a a successful individual in society, measured by society standards. And I fought so hard. I fought so hard to be that person. At one point I went and bought a big 4-wheel drive. I don't need a 4-wheel drive. I'm going to do with a 4-wheel drive. Toyota Hilux, it was, by the way. I couldn't drive it anywhere without having to put fuel in it. Couldn't even drive it past a petrol station without having to stop. It were a nightmare. I tried all that and I hit that point, that Fight Club point where I had nothing. I had no job. My house had been repossessed. My relationship had broken down. My best friend's partner had just died. My dog was dead. Everything just went smash. And that's only when, like you say, and like it says in Fight Club, that's only when I realized, well, hang on a minute. Now I can just live in my camper van and go anywhere and do anything and be anything I want. So it was so liberating.
It's an inspiring tale, and I love it. I get people to build a relationship with their deathbed self when I'm working with them. I ask them to, meditationally, like close their eyes, have a conversation with that person. And I tend to use, as a starting point, I tend to use a person's relationship with technology. So, wasting time scrolling on social media. But I try to get people into the habit of just stopping, pausing and thinking, would my deathbed self sign off on this use of time? And it's quite a powerful tool, actually, when you give yourself to it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's a really good, concept, really.
Yeah.
I'm going to think that every time I pick up my phone and look at videos of unexpected animal friends on Instagram, which I'm currently obsessed with. Did you know there's a lion that's best friends with a goat? Anyway. That's probably why I'm not doing much writing at the moment. I need to knuckle down, really.
Have you got more plans for writing?
I've just got a few. Yeah, and obviously I need to get on with the second book. It's hard because when it's summer and you're in Cornwall, and there's all these sandy beaches, golden beaches, turquoise sea, the sun is shining, and you just want to be in it. You want to be out. You want to be in nature. You want to be part of it. You want to be swimming in the sea. You want to be snorkeling and playing, and it's wonderful. And you do not want to be sat in the back of a van writing. So I'm hoping this winter, I'm gonna just settle back into it and put some deadline. Well, be really disciplined, put some time in place, allotted time, schedule. That's the word I'm looking for, and and get the second book proposal done. Should be good. And then I've got a few articles that I'm going to write. Probably start them next week. Just little things, nothing really too serious. I just get annoyed at every clothing company I go in, every clothes shop. All of the prints on all of the garments for women are always florals. It's either a floral or an animal print.
Mm.
And I am pretty tired of being aligned with this outdated, feminine ideal of women and flowers and the female and nature. And I'm just like, well, actually, I want something edgier. I want something that is representative of, all of the parts of me, not just my femininity, or perceived femininity, if you like, but all of me. Yeah. I'm not flowers, basically. I'm not flowers, Ben, and I'm sick of it. So I'm gonna try and put an article together, and hopefully it won't change the world. It won't change the world by any means, but yeah.
I'm a big believer in those really small actions, and you can never quite tell where they go. I think I see like I'm thinking of your book and the work of other friends. I see it all around me. I think there's a sea change in psychology that's happening, and it's easy to not recognize that if you just look at the headlines around the world. But underneath it all, I think people are changing. I think people are wising up, and I think every small action, every act of creativity contributes towards that. So, I would implore you and the listener to believe in those small actions, and I do think they can change the world in a very diffused way.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, that is true. Just anyone telling their truth in any way, through any means, whether it's through designing fabrics or writing books or writing articles or writing songs or having a conversation, just anyone, anywhere, at any point who is gifting the world with their truth will change the world in some way. You're right. Yeah. It's all about authenticity, isn't it? It's all about the real.
It is.
The real feels.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm excited to hear about the second book.
We're doing all right, kid. We're doing all right. And I'm looking forward to, reading The Creative Condition.
I think one bit that we should probably chat about is the scarcity aspect of it, because you mentioned it there in a financial context, as in if your time is taken up with, keeping up with the Joneses or whatever the thing might be. But there's another side of it, isn't there? And it's the scarcity of being fucking skint and being from a background of scarcity where. So here's an example. There's a guy who lives a couple of streets away from me, and he's big on working class marginalisation in the arts. And he talks about something that I'd never thought about before. And he talks about the role of smartphones. And he gave the example of things like standing at bus stops and having those idle moments where you might have daydreamed and you might have thought of something and come up with an idea. How now, not only are people kind of scratching around to make ends meet, but even those precious moments of downtime are probably going to be gobbled up quite quickly with technology. So there's not even that time to kind of think or for those creative ideas to come to us, which I thought was a really good point.
That is an excellent point. You're right. Because we're so scared of being in our own minds, because we are so, working class people, a lot of them are just on the breadline. They're living month to month, wage to wage, and doing their best to get by. And, when they have those moments, like you say, when they're stood at a bus stop or a train station, and perhaps in those moments, that's when the creative part of their brains could switch on and start thinking and reflecting and using their imagination. But it's also in those spaces in between the usual parts of our day, in between working and making the tea and whatever else. Those little moments where we have a little bit of time are also moments where worry and stress can come in. So they could be creative moments, but they could also be moments where anxiety arises and we start worrying about how the hell am I going to afford the car tax next week or blah, blah, blah. So instead of engaging with either of those things, either the creative side of our brains, the reflective side of our brains, or the anxious side of our brains, instead of doing either of those things, we just turn to the phone and we look on Instagram at videos of kittens. And then we don't have to be anxious or distressed. We no longer have the worry. The worry is in the back of the mind, whereas the front of the mind is engaged with bollocks on Instagram. And I think that's why people are less likely to access the creative parts of themselves, because it would involve having a space and a period of time where anxiety could also come in and worry could also come in.
That's a really good point. That I lost my oldest friend 2 years ago. A number of factors, alcoholism was a big one. Quite a sad story, but he was 2 years younger than me. And I lost him at 38. He came from like he's troubled in the sense that so there was a lot of alcoholism in the parental tier of his family.
Yeah.
And what it led to, the irony is they were lovely people. He didn't have the same kind of adversity that you've detailed in your book. There wasn't violence, that side of things. But what it ultimately led to was a lack of guidance. So despite the fact his parents were lovely people, there would be a lot of sitting, drinking a super strength tin of booze, watching the horse racing. He would fend for himself, in terms of simple things. Like I remember my mum always taking around a bag of my second-hand uniforms for school because he was bigger than me, 2 years younger, so it meant that when I grew out of them, they fit him perfectly. So she would look out for him and take them round. And it was little things like that growing up that you become aware of, and you realise that actually so what happens when he gets into, I don't know what, 16, 17, straight on the building site, become a really good construction worker. But I think partly down to the lack of guidance, he ended up having kids very young. So bit by bit, all of the moments you've just described there to reflect and to think are removed. And yeah, great point. So what I recognised with him was that when he did get those moments, exactly as per your description, he would be fretting about maintenance payments and the likes. So in those moments, his evening might look like a joint, a session on the PlayStation, and bedding up for work again at R5 to get on a building site the next morning. So actually, and he showed so many great bursts of creativity in our younger teenage years that he never really had the time or the headspace to follow, or the guidance to pursue. That was the difference maker. I was encouraged. I wasn't pressured, but I was encouraged to follow wholeheartedly what I felt, felt good to me. So I was always sort of aware, as quite a sensitive person, I was always aware of that with him. And I just think that's so representative of so many people that come from our backgrounds and a working class background.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's tragic, really,
Hmm.
because when you think of all that creativity and all those ideas and concepts and all that art that is there in potential in people's minds and in their hearts, and we may never ever get to experience it, and they may never ever get to reveal it to the world because they're so scared to access that space where they could create those things, because instead of creativity coming in and imagination coming in, worry, stress and anxiety would occupy that space, because you know it's hard making ends meet, living in society as it is now, especially now. God damn it, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, a household could be run on a single wage,
Yeah.
on a single wage.
But thank God my parents had that. I feel very blessed that my mum was able to stay. She did the odd bit of haircutting here and there, and she reads tarot cards. She'd do that here and there too. But, I was, because I had a mischievous streak like the rest of them. So things, these are the marginal things where life
Mm.
could have taken a different turn had my mum
Yeah, yeah,
not had the luxury of being there at home for me. So it's very interesting. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah, and but nowadays you can barely run a household and support a family on two full-time wages, and we're just trapped unless you make a massive decision like I did, and just think, actually, well, it wasn't a decision, was it? It was circumstantial. Got my house repossessed, and I had a
Hmm.
relationship breakdown, etc. So, I mean, in a way, I count myself lucky that the system spat me out. I'm like,
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
God, and then here I am with all this headspace to be able to access my creativity. And it's a real privilege, and it's a real unusual thing for a working class person to have. And that is because I live differently, and I just would love to find a way to give other people the same freedom that I have, but also safety as well, because it's hard to be creative if you don't have a safe base, to a safe platform to work from, because creativity in all of its aspects always involves vulnerability, always. Just by creating your work and putting it out there in whatever medium, whatever format it is, you are giving part of yourself to the world. You are displaying part of you, your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, your perception of the world. You are putting it out there. This is me. This is how I see the world. This is how I am. So all art involves vulnerability. And so to feel safe enough to create that art and to put that part of you out into the world, you need that stable platform. You need a safe platform. I really believe that, but some artists don't ever get that stable platform, and yet they still, they have a compulsion to put it out into the world, and which is wonderful, but often it's traumatic or it's chaotic, or you know
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's just really difficult, and I don't know how we could possibly affect a change where society is fairer for everyone. It's having conversations like this and putting this conversation that we're having out into the world. It's still a thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's still part of the change, or empowering the change that needs to happen.
It absolutely is. And to your point about reflection and time, it's really interesting. But a number of the guests that I've interviewed, maybe the generation above us, have cited they said they say it's one of the few good things that Thatcher did, but there's to talk about the enterprise allowance scheme. I don't know if you're aware of it, but
No.
it was basically, there was a thing during Thatcher's government where you could take time if you had an enterprise, a small business, a freelance enterprise, whatever it looks like. There was money there for a time to support yourself for a year or so while you started that thing. And a lot
Wow.
of the kind of the people from our background, from a working class background, all cite that enterprise allowance scheme as a really important part of their journey, in that, they wanted to start a magazine or whatever the thing was, or write a book, or write a song even. And that was a bit of a crutch for just to have that time where they could double down on their efforts and make something to get started. And it's interesting. And it saddens me that there isn't such a thing now, because the world's grayer when you don't have the same range of voices. You
Oh,
know,
yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
and I have nothing against privilege, at least not in the sense of someone's upbringing. You don't choose what you're born into.
No,
And
of
I think
course not.
that, I don't buy the whole Nepo baby thing. It kind of makes me a bit annoyed, but I think it's very judgmental. And I think that, I want the full spectrum. I want to hear from the Patrick Batemans of the world, but I also want to hear
Yeah.
from the George Orwells writing on a pittance, and it's, because that's what art is, and that's what gives us a fuller picture of what's going on in society. So I
Yeah,
think it's
absolutely.
I'd love to see something like that recognised. I don't know where I have very little faith that it will be, but I'd love to be a part of the voices that might one day help there to be such a thing again.
Yeah. Well, there's something called The Bee in Manchester, and they focus on working class voices in the arts, particularly writers. So I've just posted my book up to them, and I've explained in the email, how difficult I've found it as someone from a underrepresented background to promote my book, promote myself, within some of the bigger publications, or because unless you already have contacts, I don't have my uncle Barry who works for the Guardian. I don't have any contacts in any of the publications who are supposed to represent and support, underrepresented voices like working class people, but I just don't think there's anything out there really, because the Guardian, as much as it kind of purports to be a voice for everyone, it still isn't, it still isn't representative of the working class. It's still very middle class. And, if I'm honest, I do think people are scared of us. People are scared of working class people, and they are, because we're different. They can't relate to our life experience, our upbringings. They just can't relate to it. And again, it's going back to the beeping people who go past
Yeah,
my van. It's all fear. It's fear. So unless someone like the Bee starts their own publication, which is completely representative and inclusive of working class voices, I don't think there is currently isn't uh, a newspaper or even a magazine or anything out there that is for working class people. And it's a real shame, like you say, because it needs, all voices should be heard, all colours in the rainbow need to be, on the painting for us to really appreciate and get an idea of what is real in our
mhm.
current society, what is, authentically happening in people's lives, not just certain classes.
Yeah.
Don't know, maybe you should do it, Ben.
Maybe, but I certainly plan on, trying to contribute to that somewhat. Because I just see so much opportunity there, and the people I like to tell the stories about, they all tend to be from our town, to be honest. Let
Oh,
alone
from
that.
Kingsley. Go on,
Yeah,
Kingsley. It's crazy. It's
uh,
wonderful, though, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah,
I'll tell you what, I love this little story now, and I'll just say this last thing. So my friend, she's working class. She had a really, really difficult upbringing. Her parents, they won't make her tea or anything. They'd send her to the co-op to steal her own tea, go and nick something from the co-op. Uh, that was her upbringing. I mean, I thought I was bad getting, I haven't used net or carrier bags, but yeah, no, she wins hands down there. But she's now, because of her drive to succeed and to prove everyone wrong, she's now a real big name in the art world, and she's got, a really kind of influential job in London. And she uses her influence to basically raise the profile of working class artists. You know, she's absolute lover. You would love her. Um, what was I going to say? So she was working with this guy. He was from an incredibly privileged background, had never had any challenges in his life, no obstacles, you know, no issues. His parents were lovely. He was incredibly well educated. He had, you know, infinite amounts of disposable income. Anything he wanted, he had it. And he once, they were at a party one time, and he stopped her, a party that she'd organized, because it was like an art party, you know. It was like a interactive installation with artists and singers and dancers and sculpture. It was wonderful. Anyway, he stopped her in the midst of this event, and he just said to her, I'm so jealous of you. I'm so envious of your life. And she said, why? You know, thinking, oh my God, how could he be envious of me? You know, he's driving a brand new Jag, he's living in a penthouse in London, he's got everything he ever wanted. And he just said to her, because all of your life experience, all of the challenges, all of the difficulty that you've been through has made you more vibrant, more dynamic, more creative, more driven, more empowered than I could ever be. And I just thought that was beautiful to have that direct acknowledgement, you know, of her experience, her life experience, the difficulty that she'd been through, having so much value, because they do, you know, and it's true. And it was just lovely to that he'd taken the time to voice that.
Yep, these the struggles in such lives, they bring stories, and when those stories are, you know, when there's the opportunity to tell those stories, it is completely empowering, and there is a vibrancy there that, you know, that inspires and shows others the way. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah. So we need more working class voices. So when are you going to start your newspaper, Ben?
Oh my God, I think Laura would kill me if I started another project.
Really?
No, sure. In the best way. I do. I massively like overshoot and then end up just overwhelmed with everything. So I finally got a bit of focus at the moment. So I'm not, yeah, just trying to stay on track. But
That's
yeah,
so fun.
but I never rule anything out either. So who
No, don't
knows?
rule it out. Don't rule it out. I'd help. We'd all help. If it could be me, you, Matt Coffey, we'd take
Yeah.
over the world. Rhiannon.
How do you know those guys, by the way?
Uh, just from getting drunk in Keighley,
Yeah.
basically. Oh,
Nice.
Matt Coffey, he went to school with one of my ex-partners.
Ah,
And
okay. Yeah. No, I'm not in touch with barely anyone from my year in school, but Matt Coffey's one of them. Like, we ended up living in Crystal Palace together for a while.
oh
Me
wow.
and Rhiannon. That's when we kind of reconnected. Really, we kept seeing each other at Christmas in Keighley, going out for a drink, and we were like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, you were all right at school. We should stay in touch, really, shouldn't we?"
Yeah,
All these
you
years
were all right.
later, and then he was like, "Oh, as it goes, I'm moving to Crystal Palace." I think you said you were there.
Yeah, and him and
Uh,
Rhiannon, they also they read Dear Ricky, and they loved my writing style, and they were two of the people that they're mentioned in the thank yous at the end. Two of the people that gave me the confidence to pursue, you know, to write the book, to believe in myself,
mm.
basically. And I'll never ever forget that, you know, because you need people like that who will lift you up when you don't have the self-esteem to do it yourself. And that's
You know,
another thing that working class people lack
I was
is,
just going to say that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, because there's a tendency to share the problems and the anger that emanates from those problems, as opposed to championing someone in a really pure way. And it's not that that doesn't go on. Like my friend that I mentioned that I lost, he was my biggest champion in many ways. But in the day to day of it, when people are embattled and embittered, that happens far less, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. You're right. But also it's about attitude as well. I think depending on your upbringing, you don't strive for more Do you know what I mean? You think that, oh, that's not for me. I don't deserve that. Someone
Yeah.
like me would never be able to do that.
Hmm.
Whereas sometimes if someone's grown up in a more privileged background, I have a friend who's, yeah, he just expects everything good to happen and everything he wants to happen. He just expects it. I don't want to use the word entitled, but it could be applied in this situation. But because he expects everything good to happen, it does. And everything he wants and everything he needs and everything, it just handed, the universe just goes, oh, there you go. Oh, you need one of them. There you go. Oh, you need to know this person. Oh, there you go. And it just, his life is just one big, you know, look, it's just luck. Everything just works out for him. He's one of them.
Yeah.
And I think because he is subconsciously projecting that into the world because of his upbringing of privilege, you know, that's when the universe just gives him it back. When you are projecting, oh, I don't know about that, or I don't think I'm good enough, or no one's going to like it, everyone's going to read it and think I'm an asshole, or do you know what I mean? When you're carrying that level of self-judgment, you know, in a way you are also projecting that, and you're not going to get back what you want. We all need, especially working class people, need to find a way somehow to believe not only in ourselves, but in our work, in our creative practice, to believe in it to such an extent that we know deep within ourselves, it's amazing. It's fantastic. It's authentic. It's our voice. It's our work. And it deserves all of the attention that it's going to get, or that it will get.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, we need to definitely change our internal thought processes there
Yeah.
somehow.
Well, let's keep making our work, because I think it's one of the best ways to lead by example. And I think that, let's hope it encourages a few others to follow suit and tell their stories.
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%, Ben. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, it's been ace chatting again. And yeah, I guess people can get the book far and wide.
Oh yeah, you can literally just get it anywhere. Yeah. Um, it's nice if you can get it at an independent bookshop. I do. It's really good to support independent businesses. So there's lots of independent bookshops that sell it. A few in
Mhm.
Yorkshire. One in Yorkshire is called Wave of Nostalgia in Haworth. Um, a couple of my favourites in Cornwall, Edge of the World Bookshop and Climo Books, and the Falmouth Bookseller, St Ives Bookseller. They all stock my book. And most of the books in those shops are signed. There's a little individual message for everybody in there as well.
Brilliant.
Um, yeah, so go out there and read my story. Don't just read my story, read Ben's story as well. Creative Condition.
How good was that? Charlotte was incredible, and I found her beyond inspiring, if I'm honest. I think her story is phenomenal. It's a reminder that there is more than one way to live our lives, despite what society tries to teach us. And I think we have to fight on behalf of people like Charlotte, who are doing it different, who are showing us that. Those pricks beeping their horns at her van are exactly the trappings that this society puts on us. It makes us feel angsty about our position. It makes us angry at other people who found another way, but there is another way. Creativity can help us get there, but first we have to enable that creativity. And if our minds are trapped in our wallets and our bank accounts, then we can't go much further than that, because we are a byproduct of it, and we are making decisions not aligned with our inner artist, but with our financial needs. I've felt that recently. I've made some big decisions around my coaching practice and about moving forward with even more heart and purity than I ever have done before. And I feel amazing about it, and it has alleviated some of the pressure, and the work that is coming off the back of that energy is showing that. Charlotte should be case in point, an example of that. So thank you for listening, guys. The show is sponsored as ever by illustrationx.com. You can check out their global array of illustration and animation portfolios now over there. Please do consider supporting the ui.org.ua. Sorry, the website is just ui.org.ua. That's the Ukrainian Institute. If you want to work with me, if you want to dive into all the creativity resources, do it now, thecreativecondition.com. You can work one-to-one with me as a coach. Get in touch. We'll have a Zoom conversation to explore how that might work. It will elevate your situation. This 15 years of obsessive exploration of creativity is really coming to a point where I can help people know, and I find it incredibly fulfilling It fills me with purpose. Let's work together. If not, there's many, many free resources, including 300 plus podcast episodes there for you to learn, along with the reading list, the diary, and many, many links to other stuff. There you have it. Lovely, guys. Cheers for tuning in. Thank you to Charlotte Bradman for taking the time. Apologies for any noise interferences there. They were minimal, but Charlotte was recording out of her van, so it's going to happen. Have a nice day. See you later, guys.